Anytime somebody says, this is my process, I'm very just skeptical of that because most writers don't sit down and go, here's my framework, here's my process. I think the goal is to move someone. That is the goal. Writing is communication. And sometimes we get in trouble. And I understand, the world of content marketing. I came from that world. I still kind of live in that world. But it's not content. I think that's like a very flaccid word. What does that mean? Content. It's writing. It's communication.
Hello and welcome to the Write Podcast. I'm your host, Julia McCoy. Join me as I interview experts in the field and discuss hot content, copywriting, and marketing topics. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to episode 38 in the Write Podcast. My guest today is none other than Jeff Goins. Jeff has written 5 books, including the national bestseller, The Art of Work, published in 2015. He's also written You Are a Writer, So Start Acting Like One, and most recently, Real Artists Don't Starve, a Wall Street Journal bestseller published in 2017. Jeff has also written for some major publications, Business Insider, Fast Company, The New York Observer, to name just a few. And he hosts his own podcast at the Portfolio Life. Welcome to the Write Podcast, Jeff. It's so great to have you here.
Hey, Julia. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the first question I had for you, I wanted to delve a little bit into your story because I kind of love starting there with all of my guests. So I wanted to ask you, how did you get into writing?
Girls. That's how I got into writing.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh my goodness. Lots of girls saying no to, will you be my girlfriend? And so I would go home in middle school and I would write sad poems about these girls. And then my dad taught me to play the guitar. And so I turned those sad poems into sad songs about girls and started a band in high school called Decaf. But yeah, I've always written. And I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert who says in her TED Talk that writing is my home, not in the sense that it's the place that I'm from, but it's the place that I always return to. And writing for me was always an escape. I never thought of myself as a writer, not until the past several years of being a professional writer. But I always loved writing. I was always good at it. In 6th grade, I won the school spelling bee. The winning word was acquiescence, and I thought, that was normal. And in high school, my senior English teacher told me that I should consider being a journalist, which I just kind of blew off. And a little bit later, I in college, I helped writers as a writing tutor, or help students with their writing as a writing tutor. And it was just always this thing that I always did. And I remember being really stressed during finals time, my junior year of college, and needing to leave the dorm, go to a computer lab because I didn't have a computer in my room, go to the lab, and I would just write. It'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was studying for finals, just stressed out. And I would go to the computer lab, the 24-hour computer lab, and I would write something and I would email it to myself, like an essay, a story, a poem, something, because it was a way to cope with the stress.
Wow.
And so writing wasn't this thing that I started doing. It was this thing that I always did, or rather kept returning to. And at a certain point, I realized, maybe this makes me a writer.
Well, that really reminds me of the success stories I've seen with the writers in our team. Writing it's an art, but it also requires a lot of dedication and a passion. If you don't have that, writing is hard work. It is not easy, especially to write as many books as you've written. So I love that that's where it started. You had the passion and writing was your home.
Yeah. And I would say typing is easy. Putting words on a page is relatively easy. Writing is hard. It's something different than just typing. So yeah, I agree with that.
So to move on to our next question, you've written 5 best-selling books and you publish 1 new article and 1 new podcast every single week, which is just amazing. So I wanted to ask you, What is your secret sauce to staying on top of it all? How do you stay productive?
Secret sauce would be soy sauce. It goes with a lot more things than you would realize. It's really good with like, pork chop marinades and whatnot.
Great answer.
I don't know. There's no secret sauce. I do it because I love it. And I think if you don't love what you do, you should probably try to find a way to do something else. Now, there's plenty of things that I love that don't always make me blissfully happy.
Right.
Most of the people that I love at times make me angry and sad. And, there's drama in those relationships, and there's drama in my relationship with writing too. But it's something that I love. And so I keep doing it, and I try to stay committed to the things that I love. And so that was something I had to reconcile when I started my blog. Because since starting the blog, I've really tapered down the intensity with which I do everything. I used to write, for the first year of the blog, I wrote 400 articles for my blog and for other people's websites. So, do the math, 365 days in a year, 400 articles. I was writing and publishing over an article a day. And that's because I was writing an article every day on my website. And then I was also writing guest articles for other people's websites as well. All for free, just to kind of get my name and my work out there. And I had spent the previous 9 years chasing people's attention. I had started and stopped 9 other blogs. I had began and failed 9 different times. And this time I was determined to do something different. And I realized the only variable that I had 100% control over was my own effort. And the thing that all those 9 failed blogs had in common was I quit all of them. I would start it because I had an idea. I would get distracted. I would get bored. And some of these ideas are really bad. I had a website called The Toilet Seat, which was like supposed to be some clever confessional, blog thing about the dirty things of the world.
That's funny.
But yeah. And I realized, maybe if I just don't do that, something else will happen. And I didn't know. I was just curious. And so when I started my blog, goinswriter.com, which I've been writing on for 6-7 years straight now, it was kind of an experiment to see what would happen if I didn't quit. And so I committed when I started to write on that website, to work on it for 2 years without quitting, no matter what the results were. And my goal was to get 250 readers, 250 subscribers in 2 years. And if I did that, I wouldn't quit. And if I didn't do that, I would quit. So it wasn't like an endless commitment to, a lifetime of pain and suffering. But I was like, I'm going to do this for 2 years because I've never done that before. The only thing that I had been committed to for that long was my marriage. And so I was like, what if I don't quit this thing? I'm trying all these different things and I keep quitting them. What if I don't do that? And so I had to reconcile, if I'm not going to quit, why am I doing this? If nobody's going to pay attention for 2 years, why am I doing this? And I decided I've chased people's attention. I've done the thing where I try to just do it for other people. That doesn't work. So maybe for a while I'm going to do it for myself. And if other people want to read it too, that's great. And so the secret was, for me, it was my way to practice in public. And over time, people began to notice. And eventually I took notice of that. And now it's more of an exchange between me and my readers. But early on, for many months, and really the first year and a half, it was mostly for me. And I think that's true of all creative work. If you can't first do it for yourself, don't bother doing it for somebody else.
Yes. Well, as a content marketer, it really reminds me of the advice that Joe Pulizzi gives out. He says that it really takes 12 to 24 months of consistency with your content to see any kind of results. So that commitment you gave yourself, as well as scaling back, not committing to what would be painful, but doing something that was realistic to you. I think that is really great. So do you have any goals for your content production? Do you have any like daily, weekly? Do you work in draft stages? Tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, I have a process. I mean, first of all, like anytime somebody has a process, I think you have to understand that usually what they're doing is they are retrofitting something onto a very organic, intuitive process that they've internalized. And anytime somebody says, "This is my process," I'm very just skeptical of that because most writers don't sit down to go, "Here's my framework, here's my process." I think the goal is to move someone. That is the goal. Writing is communication. And sometimes we get in trouble. And I understand, the world of content marketing. I came from that world. I still kind of live in that world. But it's not content. I mean, I think that's like a very flaccid word. What does that mean? Content. It's writing. It's communication. It is something that you are saying, right? If you and I had a conversation, we would call that content. Right.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Consuming content. We should stop talking this way because if you are creating content for people to consume, it is unlikely that you're going to achieve the goals that you want. What you should be doing is writing in a way that will move people. And I'm like, this is not fluffy. I'm not saying that you can't sell things or that the goal isn't to get somebody to take action, but before they will move, you will have to move them and you have to write something. I don't care if it's a 12-step PDF on how to turn your television on. You will have to write something that comes from some place inside of you that's true, that in some way moves you, even if it's I was incredibly frustrated about this thing, and then I stopped being frustrated when I did these 5 things, and so I'm going to write about that way. Now, I do have a process, which is my messy way of making sense of this thing that is just how do I get to that goal, which is I want to move somebody, because that's the art. Is I want to create something that somehow mysteriously connects with somebody on the other side of the world. I mean, this is kind of the magic of marketing. Is you put something out into the world that at some point they interact with that and it makes them do something that you don't necessarily directly ask them to do, that you have no control over that, but you do it in such a way, and it's an emotional process, right?
Right.
I host this event called the Tribe Conference for writers and creatives, and I met this guy there, and I said, "How did you get here?" He said, "Magic robots." I said, "Excuse me?" He says, "This is the only way I can make sense of it." He says, "I'm not on your email list. I don't know. I don't really know who you are. But this thing happened to me this day, and my life was basically falling apart, and I started thinking about like writing a book, and then the next day I got this email from you about this conference." And he said, and I went back and read. He said, "I spent 3 hours one afternoon. I read, everything that I could find of yours, and I realized, I can trust this guy." And then I bought a ticket to the conference.
I love that. That's amazing.
Like that's the magic of marketing.
Yeah.
And your goal when you sit down to create content, when you sit down to write something that's going to move someone, your job is not necessarily to map out all of the different paths for the person to get to where you want them to go. That's impossible. I never could have done that with that guy living in Minnesota who had that terrible, like I could have said, "I'm going to write this on this day, and it's going to hit this, this guy's going to sign up for something at some point. It's going to hit this spam filter." And he found some email. It wasn't even sent that day. He found some email that had been filtered out of his inbox. It was just a weird, random, serendipitous thing. But the point is, you can't map out every potential path for your customer or client or reader to get to where you want them to go. That's not the job. The job is to write things that will move people, and then let the path, let them kind of figure out the path. Again, I know that sounds very ephemeral. So that's the goal. You said, what's the goal and what's the process? That's the goal, is to write things that will move people. So what does that mean? It means be emotional. It means tap into your own emotions. It means be clear. It means understand that you are people talk about content as if it's like a conversation. It's not a conversation. You're communicating something. So communicate something with an intent. Are you trying to persuade? Are you trying to entertain? Or are you trying to get them to take immediate action? And once you've got all that figured out, here's the goal. This is what I'm trying to do. The process, that's art. The process is all science. You sit down and you write it. And my process is what's called the 3-bucket system. And you can Google that 3-bucket system in my name, and there's lots of stuff on there, articles and stuff. But basically, what I try to do is pull apart this thing we called writing into 3 unique activities. Because what we call writing is not one thing, it's 3 things. It's coming up with an idea to write about. It's turning that idea into a draft, and then it's turning that draft into a publishable piece by editing it. And if you sit down to do all 3 of those things, come up with an idea, write it, and edit it so it's ready to publish. If you do that in one sitting, you're going to drive yourself crazy. You're not going to create your best work. And you are likely going to experience this medical condition that we call writer's block, which I don't think exists. But if you're going to sit down to try to do 3 things at once, which is crazy, it is likely going to feel like you're blocked because it's confusing for your brain. Your brain doesn't know. You've got this idea, but is this a good idea? Well, you've got to write something, and so then you've got to hit this word count. But is the idea any good? I don't know. Now I've got to edit it because I have to publish it tomorrow. That's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to have bucket 1, ideas. Constantly capture ideas throughout the day, not during writing time. Bucket 2, sit down at an appointed time, same place, same time, every day, as often as possible. Take one of those ideas and draft them. Turn them into a 500 to 1,000 word piece, or 250 words, or whatever you want to do. I do 500 words. Save that draft. It is a brain dump. Don't edit it. Don't look at it. Just put it in a folder of half-written ideas. Then eventually from doing this, you'll have more than one thing in that bucket. Pull out something from bucket number 2, the drafts bucket, and edit it. Go, how do I make this thing into what it's supposed to be? That's what editing is, not proofreading. You're not trying to make things grammatically perfect. You're trying to turn the piece into what it's supposed to be. Then you edit it and you get it ready to publish. If you do that every day, come up with new ideas, take one of those ideas and draft them. Edit an old draft so that it's ready to publish. You will never run out of content to publish. This is how I was able to publish a new good 1,000+ word article every single day for 365 days. And you'll never run out of stuff to publish. You will never run out of ideas when you feel like you're stuck and you just need an idea to write on. And you'll always have something to work on. And so that's called the 3-bucket system, and that's my process for writing.
3-bucket system. I love that. It's awesome how those stages are so well defined. And just like you said, you can't train your brain into doing all 3 things at once, which is so common. In my agency, we work with so many content clients, and they oftentimes have a very tight deadline, a defined expectation of what they want to see, but we can't deliver something in 2 days. We're not magicians. We are writers. So, it's kind of hard in the content marketing industry to define how writing works. So what would you say to someone who's like having trouble bringing these things to their boss is giving them tight deadlines? Is there any advice you would give them?
So there's 2 sides of this, right? There's the commitment that you have to the client, and then there's the commitment that you have to yourself. So the client doesn't need to understand the process, shouldn't understand the process. They care about the product. They care about the end result. Right. And it's your job, it's my job, it's our jobs as service providers to take care of the process. And so that's the commitment to the client. So a deadline is a deadline. If you accept the assignment with a 2-day deadline, you meet the deadline. That's the difference between a professional and an amateur. An amateur says, I need more time. I need to wait to be inspired. Every professional I know, writer, editor, artist, entrepreneur, whatever, every true professional I know meets their deadlines almost always. Life happens. We're human. But the difference between a professional and amateur is a professional always meets their deadlines. No matter what. You have to stay up all night. Yeah. You've got to figure it out. Exactly. Fine. It doesn't have to be a perfect process. I was talking to an editor friend of mine the other day, and she said, I've got 75,000 words to edit. I go, oh, okay. What are you doing now? Well, I'm watching YouTube videos right now. Oh, okay. Are you going to how are you going to get this done? I'm going to get this done on time, like I do everything, but this is my process. And I
Oh,
think we
that's
worry
great.
so much about the process. The client doesn't care about the process. They care about the end result. But your commitment to yourself is to do your work, do the best work that you know how to do. So you can't commit to a project that doesn't allow you to deliver the product that you feel like you can promise. And so that's an integrity move. So if you're going to take on a job that requires you to somehow circumvent your process, then you've got to figure that out. And there are times when that's a good idea, right? When you take on more than you think you can handle because it forces you to grow. It forces you to become more efficient.
Exactly.
Your 5-day process all of a sudden has to become a 2-day process. Can you do that? I mean, those are the risks that we have to take as entrepreneurs. But your commitment to yourself is to do the best work possible. So if somebody says, I have a 2-day deadline, and you go, my process is a 5-day process, you go, okay, then we're not the agency for you, and you have to be comfortable turning that business away because you cannot deliver that. But I would say that they don't care. Like it is a waste of time to explain to them your process. This is how it works. And if they're interested or curious, you can talk about it. That's fine. But I think a lot of creative agencies sort of condescendingly assume that they need to explain to, all of these, left brain people how the creative process works. That's not what they're paying you for. They're not paying you to understand your process. They're paying you to get something that they can't otherwise produce.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. And that reminds me of how I began as a freelancer. And this was back in 2011. Gosh, I was writing so much per day, and it did force me to learn how to be a better writer. So sometimes that capacity can really train some good skills. But my answer to, well, how do I handle all this work coming in? My answer was to build a team. And,
Yeah,
that's been my answer ever since.
it's awesome.
So this was an awesome chat, Jeff. I love all the insights you shared. So to wrap up, what would be something you would give as a piece of advice to a new writer? Like whenever you look back on where you were at the beginning, what's something you would have loved to know that you know now?
I mean, I mentioned this already, so I'll give 2 things. One, the importance of perseverance, of just not quitting, is essential. And I wish I would have known then that success happens for different people at different times in different ways. And I kind of thought that it was just, kind of this straight line and, up into the right in a positive direction. And in reality, it's like you're working really hard on something and then, something blows up. It's not, it's kind of all over the place. It can be exponential growth. It can be an erratic thing. And so you can't control necessarily how it all happens, right? The first 6 months of my blog, I grew an email list of 80 people. The next 6 months of my blog, we grew from 80 to 10,000
Wow.
email subscribers. I never could have guessed that. I wasn't concerned with that at that time. I was concerned with doing the work. And so don't quit, I think, is pretty good advice. If this is something that you feel like you're meant to do, that you're supposed to do, it's something that you can love doing for a while without anybody paying attention to you, then good. Consider this, pre-season training. This is practice. And as much as possible, learn to practice in public so that as you get better, people can see you getting better, whether that's with a blog or writing on Medium or, doing piecework or whatever makes sense for you. So yeah, I mean, I think that is really important. Then the second thing that was not obvious to me was just it's not writing advice, but it's business advice. The importance of relationships is essential. And knowing the right people, will give you, quote unquote, the connections, network that you need to succeed. But more importantly than that, it'll help you get better. If you surround yourself with people who are doing similar work and you can spur each other on, each of you can help one another get to where you want to go faster. And I like to say it's not what you know or who you know, but it's who you help. And so building a network is not about connecting with people. I connect with people all day long. I connect with the, barista who's giving me a cappuccino. That's not going to lead to a network, right? The people that you really connect with are the people that you stay in touch with, where you're adding value to each other's lives, which is a fancy way of saying, let's be friends, right? So, find a way to help other people. And over time that creates a network, and that's how you get referrals and influence and all that stuff. And so, for a long time I resisted that. And this is a social job. This is a social world, and people do business with people that they know. And so your first job is to work on your craft, and your second job is to start knowing some people. Great
advice. That is just awesome. Well, are you writing a sixth book? I have to ask, because you've written 5 so far. Are you on a new one?
I'm writing a 6th book, and I'm about to start a 7th book.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So yeah, I try to just keep writing. I'm actually co-writing a book with a friend right now. And I'm beginning to kind of think about my next 7th book. That'll just be, kind of the continuation and what I've written thus far. So yeah, still early stages, but it's good. It's fun. If I don't have a book that I'm working on, I'm kind of a crazy person.
Well, you are a true writer. Do you have a predicted date for your next book?
No, I don't. No, it's still very early for that, but it'll be a while.
Well, we will all be looking forward to it, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the Right Podcast and sharing your time and your knowledge with us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Julia. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed and got a lot out of today's Right Podcast episode with Jeff Goins. I've followed him for years. I've recommended his books to other freelancers. He is amazing. You can go read his blog at goinswriter.com and follow him on Twitter at Jeff Goins. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of The Right Podcast. I hope you'll subscribe in iTunes and catch the next episodes when they come out. You can also read the show notes on my site at expresswriters.com/right-podcast. See you next time.